Just before we get started with today's video, let me tell you that it's sponsored by ExpressVPN. Take back your internet privacy today and find out how you can get 3 months for free by clicking the link in the description box. More about ExpressVPN in a bit. Many people like to think of big corporations as sort of like their friends, and the corporations, they certainly don't try too hard to convince people otherwise. In fact, recent efforts on social media by large companies have taken advantage of this by using a personal touch and often turning their company into a lovable character run by a very real, sarcastic, and witty individual. However, large companies are immoral at best, more interested in profit than they are in doing what's right. Companies only tend to go out of their way to do the right thing if social pressure means that they could lose or gain sales, and they will sometimes do callously evil things if they know they can get away with it. In today's video, we're going over 10 shocking times that corporations abuse their power to put profit over people's safety, well-being, and privacy. Number 10. Cutter, a division of Bayer, sold HIV-tainted medicine in Asia and Latin America. Back in the 1980s, Cutter, a division of the Bayer pharmaceutical giant, had a bit of a problem on their hands. They had medicine that was meant to treat hemophiliacs, and the medicine worked quite well at helping blood to clot. They also had a lot of it on their hands. Unfortunately, they also found that the medicine had been tainted by HIV, and getting rid of it would have meant losing a lot of profit. Heat treating would likely make it safe, but it might make the medicine not as effective. Now they had a bit of an issue, because if they put this medicine out, not only would people get HIV, but they'd be exposed to some pretty substantial penalties. The medicine, called Factor VIII concentrate, was sold to Asia and Latin America instead of Europe and North America. Eventually, Cutter Biological did start selling a heat-treated version, but there is evidence that they were still selling the tainted stock a year after that, because they simply wanted to get rid of it. Thousands of hemophiliacs were infected with HIV, and some contracted AIDS and died as a result. Over the course of the decades, Bayer has had to pay out $600 million to the victims of their division's lack of basic human ethics. To this day, however, after settling a lot of cases out of court, they still contend that they acted ethically and responsibly based on the information that they had at the time. Number 9. Foxconn has a problem with contract employees committing suicide, so they install nets. Several years back, many people heard about a company called Foxconn in China that was treating their employees so badly they were committing suicide. In 2010 alone, 18 employees ended their own lives. Employees lived in a dormitory-style factory and would work for many months at a time at the factory. Yet no real time for friendship or a social life, and talking was completely forbidden while working. 12-hour working days were common, and employees were often berated and publicly humiliated or punished for not meeting proper productivity standards. The company's response to the media outrage was to point out that 18 suicides in a year was about the national average, and that in a factory as large as theirs, it made sense that it reflected that average. Further, the company installed nets that would catch people who attempted suicide and would make them sign a contract saying that the company wasn't responsible if they killed themselves. The company does now have a labor union, but it's basically a joke, as the CEO of the labor union personally works for the head of Foxconn. Since the outcry, Foxconn has done some window dressing of the problem, but if anything, the pressure on workers is even worse now. Number 8. Nestle and other chocolate companies buy from third world farms that use child labor. The chocolate confection industry is currently valued at a little over $100 billion in sales per year and is expected to grow to around $160 billion by 2024. Many companies like Mars, Cadbury, Hershey's, Nestle, and others, they all want a piece of that increasingly large pie, and most already post large revenue numbers every year. Now, Nestle's global brand sells far more than just chocolate, but they posted total sales in 2018 of close to $100 billion, with a tidy net profit of a little over $10 billion US. The GDP of Ghana and the Ivory Coast, the two countries who produce the vast majority of the world's chocolate, is currently around $87 billion combined. Since the early 90s, the developed world has become increasingly worried about the child labor problem in the chocolate-producing nations and has encouraged the big chocolate companies to do something about it. Nestle and other big chocolate companies have pledged a total of $500 million to make schools and teach as many as 300,000 farmers. They are also focused on helping them increase productivity, which is probably the wrong way to stop child labor. While they have helped some schools be built, experts don't think nearly enough is being done. Between Ghana and the Ivory Coast, there are roughly 55 million people, so 300,000 is probably not even close to the majority of farmers that need to be reached. Big Chocolate has also been setting deadlines to fix the issue and blowing past them for decades, and their latest deadline looks just as unsustainable. They claim they will only buy from certified sources by 2020, but with 2 million children still working and experts believing the problem is getting worse, not better, at least in the short term, it's unlikely that they're going to reach that goal unless their certification program allows for child labor. While no one has an easy answer, experts believe it is a problem that is going to require a lot more than $500 million to fix, and without a proper partnership with the governments and true legal enforcement to stop child labor, the problem is never going to go away. Unless the companies who the economies of these countries rely on pressure them, they will never have a reason to step in and do something about the problem. Number 7. Nike and the rest of the clothing industry utilize a lot of overseas labor. After spending decades cleaning up their image, in 2017, new protests started to emerge against Nike, primarily led by a group called USAS, a student organization whose acronym stands for United Students Against Sweatshops. They have been protesting over allegedly poor work conditions in factories, allegedly anti-union tactics, and not allowing an independent organization run by universities called the Workers' Rights Consortium to inspect Nike factories. Also in 2017, there was renewed interest in an ongoing problem in Cambodia, a country that has a garment labor force of about 600,000 people, mostly women. Essentially, Cambodia doesn't have some of the same standards as their neighboring Vietnam, who by law mandates factory temperatures are not above 32 degrees Celsius, whereas the government in Cambodia has set no standard in terms of temperature. Fainting is common and mass faintings are not unheard of. In 2016, a little over 1,000 faintings was considered a great improvement over about 1,800 from the previous year. Now, it's important to understand that a lot of these factories are not directly run by Nike or the other clothing companies. Many of them are run by contractors under Nike's employ or even by subcontractors. Now, this doesn't absolve them entirely of responsibility, and Nike agrees. Nike, Puma, Asics, and others have been working in countries like Cambodia to improve conditions in factories that are producing their garments, but the experts feel that not enough is really being done. Some have offered longer-term contracts that ease worker fears or installed cooling systems, given safety training, or even handed out energy bars and other useful things. However, the biggest problem is that the best wage that Nike and the other big garment makes are pushing for is the minimum wage. And in the majority of countries where clothing is produced, the minimum wage is well below the living wage in order to get by in that country. Until all the large clothing companies, not just Nike, pressure the government and the contractors and the subcontractors under them to provide a living wage as part of their codes of conduct, many living and working in garment-making countries will continue to struggle mightily, working long days simply in the hopes of getting by. Number 6. Philip Morris made anti-teen smoking ads. They were ineffective. Obviously. In 1999, Philip Morris announced their plans to start making anti-teen smoking ads, and the outcry, it was pretty much immediate. At the time, there were plans for a national anti-smoking campaign for actual public health that would cost around $1.5 billion, and many states were running some very hard-hitting anti-smoking ads that graphically showed the physical effects of smoking and what it could do to your body, including showing someone smoking through a tracheotomy tube. People who criticized Philip Morris felt that the $100 million they were spending on anti-smoking ads would be better spent by groups that actually had a real reason for people not to smoke. However, Philip Morris insisted on running their own ads, and it was quickly apparent why the experts didn't want them making anti-smoking ads and why they felt it was pretty much just an underhanded move to dilute the message of the hard-hitting ads. The ads depicted teens just basically saying things like, "I don't need to smoke to prove myself," which, as some surveyed teens explained, didn't really give them any particular reason not to smoke. In fact, random teens who were surveyed by the various different anti-smoking ads always found the ones by Philip Morris to be the least effective, whereas the ones that showed the most graphic depictions possible of the dangers had the most positive effect when it came to making people not want to smoke. So look, there are lots of shady goings on in the world today, both from companies and individuals, and that's why, before we get into the top 5 today, I want to take a moment to tell you about ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN allows you to take back your internet privacy, and clearly that's something we all need to be doing. Why do you need to do that? Well, if you shop online, a VPN is a great way to prevent hackers from getting a hold of your credit card information. Now, I'll often be doing some work in a coffee shop, or if I'm at the airport on an open Wi-Fi connection or something like that, and the good news is I don't have to worry about my personal information leaking out because I use a VPN. And ExpressVPN has speeds consistently faster than other VPNs, and it works on all of your devices: Windows, iOS, Android, Linux, all of them are covered. It's also the market-leading VPN, rated #1 by TechRadar. It's also incredibly easy to install. You just register, log in, download, you plug in this unique code, and boom, you're good to go. It's really amazingly easy to do. That all costs you less than $7 a month, but if you don't like it, just in case you don't, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee. So take back your internet privacy today and find out how you can get 3 months for free by clicking the link in the description box below, or just go to expressvpn.com/TopTenz. Take back your privacy today with ExpressVPN. Number 5. Mylan hiked the price of life-saving EpiPens by more than 400% to make money. In 2015, with increasing notice of pharmaceutical price gouging due to the infamous Pharma Bro, people started raising hell that the price of life-saving EpiPens had been hiked by 400% in just a few short years. A drug company called Mylan bought the patent in 2007 and started needlessly raising the price. It went from $50 for a single EpiPen to $600 for a 2-pack in just 7 years. The CEO of Mylan, Hella Bresch, saw her company gain about $1 billion extra in profit per year because of this, and saw tens of extra $1 million in personal salary. When called before a congressional committee, she gave all kinds of excuses, but she didn't really need to. The sickening actions that her company took, they were entirely legal. There really are no price caps or any kind of laws that would prevent the pharmaceutical companies from doing this, and because they own the patent, they have been doing everything they can to prevent a generic from entering the market. However, a company called Teva has been working on approval for a generic for some time, both to get past the FDA's inspections and to work their way past legal challenges from Mylan. In 2018, they finally got approval, and you can now buy a generic 2-pack for about $110, which is really just $10 more than the original price, as they were $50 for just one. Mylan, still being tone deaf, has offered their own generic alternative for the generous price of just $300 for a 2-pack. How big of them? Number 4. Conditions at Tyson, Perdue, and Pilgrim factories allegedly led to diaper use on the line. A couple of years back, a report by Oxfam, a charity focused on ending poverty, found that there were incredibly abusive conditions at many chicken processing factories, including those owned by giants like Tyson, Perdue, and Pilgrim. These factories are said to not only be very dangerous, even when proper safety standards are met, but it's also cold and underappreciated work. These things would be bad enough, but the worst part is that after interviewing thousands of employees, they were left with horror stories of people routinely being denied bathroom breaks when they needed them. According to a report, many employees were resorting to adult diapers not just to urinate, but also to defecate on the line. While this is an awful way to treat your employees and abusive on so many levels, it should also bother you even if you don't really care about human suffering, because it's kind of disgusting that something like that is going on right next to the food that's being prepared for you and then being sold at the supermarket. While all the major chicken suppliers such as Pilgrim, Perdue, and Tyson at first claimed that the company policies were already against such things and denied that something like that could be widespread, Tyson eventually responded to an Oxfam petition, which garnered well over 150,000 signatures, by promising to incorporate more safety training and bathroom breaks in order to improve conditions in the workplace. Number 3. Family Dollar got around overtime laws by calling hourly employees managers. Family Dollar is not really a store you tend to think about much. You might shop there if you tend to be really thrifty, or maybe you stop in every once in a while in order to get a certain thing really cheaply. But it's not really a part of popular culture like McDonald's or Walmart is. It's just really not on people's radars. However, it did manage to get itself into quite a bit of hot water a few years back. You see, the company was struggling to meet all of its costs, and they felt that they could cut costs in the area of labor. So they decided to start calling everyone a manager and then have them spend their days doing non-managerial tasks. Family Dollar thought they'd found a loophole wherein they didn't have to give any extra compensation for overtime work. Many employees complained of being expected to work a 60 to 80-hour week, often being forced to work 12-hour days. This was all without being paid time and a half for their overtime hours. Unfortunately, Family Dollar didn't get away with it. Well over 500 improperly classified managers sued in 2011, and in 2014, Family Dollar settled to the tune of $1.5 million. Number 2. Facebook analyzes your private messages and gave permissions to Spotify and Netflix. Facebook's CEO Mark Zuckerberg has admitted to scanning your private messages in order to look for things like child pornography, which is all well and good as long as no human being is actually looking at the messages unless there's a really good reason for someone to be doing so, such as law enforcement requesting certain documentation. However, Zuckerberg's Facebook was caught at the end of last year in yet another privacy scandal, although they'll claim it's all legal as you sign your privacy OA when you join them. The scandal was because Facebook, in order to better help certain partners target ads to you, had given permission to apps like Spotify and Netflix to not only read your private messages, but see who else was in chat and even delete them. Now, there is no evidence that they were deleting messages or that random employees even had access or were reading people's private conversations, but the fact that they would even give other companies that ability at all is quite disturbing. Facebook, for their part, doesn't seem apologetic. They just stubbornly contend that they have every right in terms of your privacy agreement with them, so too bad if you don't like it. Number 1. Big Oil allegedly knew decades back what sustained oil use would do to the climate. In 2015, a leaked report that had been commissioned by Exxon back in the 1980s showed something that shocked a lot of people around the world and also kind of just confirmed what a lot of people already thought. The report showed a climate change model due to the use of fossil fuels and increased CO2 that was pretty on track in terms of how scientists believe it has and will continue to affect us. In 2017, another report was leaked, this time commissioned by Shell, but also from the 1980s, and it had pretty similar findings to the one commissioned by Exxon. Exxon and Shell deny they had some sort of advanced knowledge, and they obviously plowed ahead with damaging the planet. They deny that they put together a misinformation campaign about climate change and what their product would do, while knowing full well what it would actually do. Exxon has also defended themselves by saying that the single leaked document is out of context. Now, this would be a fair enough defense. They could argue that it was simply a single report out of many, and they chose to reject it and didn't believe it, or considered it doomsday hysterical or inaccurate. However, they also have refused to be transparent about the issue, when doing so would really help clear up what they did or didn't know. The State Attorney General of Massachusetts, Maura Healey, opens up an investigation into whether Exxon misled consumers after the initial memo was leaked in 2015. Exxon immediately sued her, claiming that she was biased and didn't have jurisdiction. However, it doesn't look like they're going to win the case. They've repeatedly lost appeal after appeal, and it looks like they're going to have to hand over 40 years of internal climate change documents. Now, we don't know what the oil companies did or didn't know and when, but it is just a little bit suspicious that Exxon is working so hard to avoid releasing the documents that would clear up that little out-of-context memo from 2015. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. Also, please do check out ExpressVPN. They are linked to below. And as always, thank you for watching.